Hello?
Hi, this is Fam Electric Ghost.
Hi.
Good, so you can hear me. I'm just going to give a little brief intro. This is the Fam Electric Ghost Show, and we're talking to Cera Gibson.
Mm-hmm.
And we interview indie artists from around the world. We've been doing it for about 2 years. We're on Spotify because Anchor FM is part of Spotify, and we're actually sponsored by Spotify as well. Yeah, we've been interviewing about 30 artists over the last 2 years, and now we have Cera Gibson on, and we're go.
I'm so happy to be on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, so we sent you the questions, which hopefully you got.
Mm-hmm.
But we typically, run through them and then we talk about like how you create music. We're musicians and producers ourselves. So,
Awesome.
so we like to get into the details of how people create, how creators create their work. So, but we always like to start with like the question, like, when did you first get into music and at what age?
Well, I have been into music as long as I can remember. I believe 3 is my earliest memory of it, and it was just my mom exposed me to a lot of musicals, and Wizard of Oz was by far my favorite. I used to reenact it constantly, day to day in the house. So I started there, and because my mom saw I had an interest in music, she put me in some child choirs, and I did that for a while until I got into public school. And it didn't really stop from there, honestly. It just continued until I was in middle school, and that's when I started to create my own music.
So, is your voice your primary instrument, or do you play other instruments?
I sing, I play guitar and the piano as well, and the piano ends up translating into like synths and MIDI and all of that good stuff,
Cool.
which is my main instrument for production.
Okay, yeah, because I'm a keyboardist, so I'm a lover of I'm kind of old school in terms of electronic music. I kind of look toward like Keith Emerson and Yes, and the old original Phil Peter Gabriel Genesis. I'm kind of an old school progressive rock guy.
That's great. I love that.
I have like Modes and Prophets and like real 808s and
I
Lynn
love
Dunn.
Moogs.
Yeah, I'm just totally diving into modes. I just have tons of modular modes. But yeah, so I mean that's really cool because I think they're great creative tools. Like besides like having a guitar, I understand a lot of people today they use the DAW, the digital audio workstation. They use their Apple, but to me, like an analog synth like a Moog, it's like having a Fender Strat or a Telecaster because
Yeah.
it has it's a living, breathing electronic instrument that acts similar to those acoustic instruments in terms of its being able to give you different tones all the time.
You're totally right.
Yeah, so that's cool. So when did you decide that you actually had material and you wanted to have a voice, you wanted to create your own music? Because there's a lot of people that get into music and they never write their own music. They play other people's music or they're set, but when did you decide I've got something to say and I want to express it?
I was really young. I remember my babysitter, she showed me a song that she had written. I think I was like 10 and she was 14 or 15 at the time. And at the time I could read sheet music. Now I go primarily off of ear, which is a blessing and a curse. But she showed me her song and I kind of thought, you know what? Like if she can do it, I can do it. Because for some reason as a kid, you have this perception that only like these big musicians write music. I don't know why, but just seeing like my babysitter do it, I wanted to. And so really all I did was just like write down some lyrics and I came up with a little melody. I wasn't really playing instruments too much at that time. Like I could play piano a little bit, but it wasn't anything all that impressive. And so I started to just like write poetry and put melodies to it. And then when I was 12 years old, I got my first guitar and I was writing music constantly. Like when I wasn't at school, I was writing music.
So guitar is like your primary writing instrument rather than like a piano?
Yeah, right out the gate. I didn't really start fully getting into piano a lot more until I was about 15, and then they're equal for me at this point. It's just like depends on the mood I'm in.
Yeah, because the piano, I was in a band, and what happened was everybody went and did their own thing, and I kept on going.
Mm-hmm.
And and synthesizers allowed me to kind of be one man band like what Prince did. And
Yeah.
so I built a studio and I just do everything. And because everybody stopped showing up and I kept on going. But
Mm-hmm.
what I liked about the piano is that you can write the bass parts, you can write the melodies, you can write
Yeah.
everything. You can play drums, you can do every, string parts, everything, horn parts. And so I started on a clarinet, and
Oh,
then
wow.
I started from a wind instrument, and then I got into synths, and then I incorporated some of the techniques that wind instruments have into my music,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of jazzy, but jazz influenced ideas coming from winds and stuff. But yeah, I think it's cool how people, come up with different ways of doing it. It's cool that you actually can do like the guitar and the piano, because those are like the primary writing instruments that
They
most people use.
are. Yeah, and I love what you said about the piano because it's so true, and especially with like digital recording and the way that music is produced in this day and age, like learning how to play the keyboard has been such a benefit for me because really like all of the music I have out now, I arranged in nearly every song like 100% of everything, like even the drums, and that was just purely because I was able to assign samples to certain keys and whatnot, and use like electronic drum kits. And then if I wanted to have an organic instrument, then it was already all written and road mapped, and like I didn't need to know how to write the sheet music for it because I had it all put out in MIDI.
Yeah, that's what's great about MIDI. I mean, I kind of am a weird bird in that I started on Tascam analog tape recorders back
Mm-hmm.
in the 80s. And what I did is I moved from Tascam 4 and 8-track tape machines to Zoom R24s.
Yeah.
And I never went to the DAW. I just kept on using my analog direct into the Zoom.
Oh,
And
wow.
just overdub everything, and I manually play everything. And I just keep on overdubbing. And it's kind of like the old school. It's kind of like when you went to a studio and you actually went on tape and overdub. And I call it expansive sound because it's I just layer things in a kind of expansive, kind of ambient, progressive, like what Yes and all these older bands
That's
used to
cool.
do. Yeah, I continued to do that. But I understand how DAW works, and I was into it. But analog synths, I just don't like how they get captured
Mm,
in the DAW, and like my modes, I like to put them direct into my Zoom.
totally makes
Um,
sense.
but yeah, it's cool what you can do today as one person. That you can, if you've got the drive,
Mm-hmm.
and like Townsend. I don't know if you ever heard about the story of Pete Townsend. He used to write everything for the
Yeah.
band. He used to write all the parts, and then he would go and give like quadrophenia to the band, and then they had to like take all his parts and give, Entwistle was a better bass player than Pete, so he took all the bass parts and made them better.
Yeah.
I mean, Keith Moon was a better drummer than what his drum machines could do, and Daltrey could sing better than Pete. And so he would. But the original demos, the songs are very close to what the Who actually did. I mean, they just have more life because the rest of the band did it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just interesting. Like if you've got the drive, you can write everything.
No, you really can. And I mean, it's funny because there will be parts that I'll write and I'll be like, you know what? Like, it sounds fine, but someone else could do it better, but it's already written. So I like bring in a friend who's a better musician for that specific instrument, and then they play it for me. And
Yeah.
I'm like, awesome. But it's amazing. Like, I've really gotten into digital recording because of like that freedom that it gives me. Um, and I mean, I started out doing like blues and rock and roll kind of music, which I freaking
Mm-hmm.
love, but it it wasn't
Yeah.
like, and it's sad that this has happened, but it wasn't marketable anymore. And so what I did is I'm like, okay, how can I take like these darker tones in my music and like the lyricism that I use and update it a little bit. And so I messed around for a solid year, just like getting to know DAWs and understanding all the different plugins and expanding my skills on the keyboard and guitar and finding like more of like a pop electronic feel that was still speaking to like me as an artist.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's interesting in your write up on Spotify. It talks about like you've influenced by Stevie Nicks and then Leonard
Yeah.
Cohen, and then you've got this kind of dark pop that's kind of synth wave kind of. No, I love like I think MGMT kind of has a dark psychedelic
Yeah.
nature, and I kind of pick up that kind of thing that they're doing. They got this like Sid Barrett, Pink Floyd vibe, and you're bringing out this kind of darkness, and I'm looking at an album called Dark Ghost, and I kind of bring out this dark concept.
Yeah.
And there's like dark wave, synth wave. Like dark wave is a little twist on synth
Mm-hmm.
wave, and it seems like you're kind of in that zone.
Yeah.
Um, where you're bringing in a classic, person like a Stevie Nicks with the kind of pop craft,
Yeah.
but then a Leonard Cohen is like that kind of experimental nature, you know,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Well,
cool.
thank you.
I love that kind of like you're mixing like a lot of genres, like dark pop and hip hop and like a little new wave and everything. To me, that's where the music is headed when you combine
Mm-hmm.
genres. Is that what you find? Is like you came from blues, you came from that, and you found out that like Stevie Ray Vaughan went for years not being able to play Texas blues
Mm-hmm.
anywhere but
Yeah.
Texas until he finally blew up, and kind of forced it and forced people to come to him.
Yeah.
But you don't always can't be like Stevie Ray Vaughan to force the genre to get back. Sometimes you got to slide into another genre.
No, it's true. Like, I feel like genres are really starting to blur. And like, I'll see country artists collaborating with hip hop artists, which for me, like, that's weird for me. But
Yeah, that's big. That's big nowadays. That's a big new
no, it is
thing.
a big new thing, but like I feel like pop and hip hop, they work together really seamlessly. And for me, like growing up with like rock music and metal and all of that, I have such a love for guitar and electric guitar. And so
Yeah,
I'm like trying to integrate electric guitar in with like this more modern version of pop music and hip hop. And I love that it's being so well received because I mean, the music that I put out before, and you probably haven't heard it because I did take it down off of like a lot of platforms because I rebranded. It was
yeah.
very retro, and it was recorded in RCA Studio A in Nashville, with musicians that have played with like Dolly Parton and like
I
the
would love to hear
Eagles.
that. I love like Flying Burrito Brothers and Eagles, and I mean I'm a big fan of like classic rock. But I know that genre is not well received anymore, so I understand the direction you're going.
Yeah, but I mean, it was awesome. Like the experience was awesome because that album, or I guess it was an EP at the time, like that wasn't recorded digitally. Like it was all analog, so it had such a warm, like retro feel to
Oh,
it.
I yeah, I would probably want to hear that
Yeah,
because
I would be happy to show it to you. It's a bit of a departure from what I'm doing now for sure, but it was nice to get a chance to record that kind of music. But when I put it out and I saw my demographic was mainly people like my parents' age, that's totally fine. But like the main consuming public is going to be like in their late teens, early 20s. And so I was missing out on the majority of the market. And I thought, well, like I love music. It's my passion. Like I do it because I care about it, but I would also like to make a living at it. And so I had to
yeah,
evolve.
yeah, yeah. You got to make the right decision. It's like a lot of times as an artist, I just did soundscapes without a
Oh,
vocal,
cool.
and then I came up with the idea of creating my alter ego, Josephine Electric,
Hmm.
which is like a created voice through a vocoder. I use the Roland
I love
vocoder
vocoders.
to change. I use a VT4 that actually changes me into this like a soprano sound, and it makes me have a female voice. And I created a whole mythology around my band that has a lead singer named Josephine
That's
Electric,
cool.
and she's a ghost, and it's a whole band of ghosts, and she has a sister named Stephanie, and the whole band is like kind of like the Gorillas. This idea of like a fictional band.
I love that.
But when I did that, I went from 1,200 listens on SoundCloud to now I have 90,000 listens.
Wow.
And then I got picked up by Anchor and Spotify to do this podcast because they saw what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so, and then I got a record contract with Bentley
That's
Records.
so sick.
So it's just, I changed, and I never wanted to sing. I was just a player.
Hmm.
I was just, I was a musician. I didn't sing at all. And then when I finally took the step to create that character, now I got to this point,
Hmm.
which is weird. Like sometimes you have to transform, to get out there. And it wasn't like a business decision. It just kind of was a happy accident. I was playing with my machine. And I said, "Where'd this voice come
Yeah.
from?" And I just kind of doubled down on it. And said, "That's a feminine voice coming out of in my ear." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna kind of imagine what I think the female side of me would
Hmm.
do." And I created this whole idea, and kind of just it just blew up, you know. And so you never know. It's like sometimes you have to change. You know, to me, it's like what happened with Bowie. You know, Bowie was David Jones. He couldn't get any
Yeah.
traction. When he created Ziggy, he got all the traction in the world. It totally. Then he kept on creating
Yeah.
characters. You know, Aladdin Sane, the Thin White Duke. He always had to be a character.
It's
You know.
pretty interesting how that works. Like I have noticed that as well. Like when I was just like Cera Gibson, Sarah Gibson, and I was putting out my blues music, and it was like extremely, it's weird. Like I feel like people don't want pure authenticity. Like they want to see it kind of through like a theatrical lens. They want to see
Yeah.
these deeply personal things through something that feels a little more separated from themselves, so that they feel more like a spectator. And that's been really interesting, but like so fun to work with. Like I don't know, did you see my Blood Diamond music video?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's super, like it's a caricature of myself for sure. And like directly commenting on, I feel like in pop music you hear a lot of songs about how people are talking about they're going to be famous and they're rich, and like how everybody loves them and they can get all the ladies and whatever. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like saying, I want to be that person too, but I also like talking about like the problems with that, but instead of like trying to be preachy and like shoving that down someone's throat, it's like I created a character almost to say
Yeah,
that through.
that's why I kind of saw that you did that, because I see that a lot nowadays. People kind of create a persona.
Mm-hmm.
You know, even people who think somebody's authentic, a lot of times it is actually a persona. You actually meet them.
Yeah.
Cause I went to a hip hop club in New York, and and I'm like all these guys with gold chains and 6-pack abs, and I might come on stage singing like this,
That's
you know,
amazing.
and I didn't know what was gonna happen. And this guy comes up to me. He's a real tough guy. I'm like, oh no, he's gonna try to like take me down. And then the guy wanted to ask me like about technical questions, and he didn't have the demeanor that his look had.
Mm-hmm.
He was just as techno nerdy as
Yeah.
me, but he looked is buff and is like street, cred, but he was not what he appeared to be.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost like that was as a persona in itself, that he wasn't what he portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like, then I learned like all these guys I thought might be like give me a trouble. They all went and asked me like what I was using and what kind of thing. They were like deep into the production, even though their image would make you like, oh, maybe I don't know if I can talk to these guys. So it's like I started to realize like everybody's putting on an act.
Yeah, like they are a little bit. There's like a bit of a persona to most people in the industry. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So you've been that you've transformed yourself. So maybe you kind of go back like when you first came out and you did this whole thing in Nashville, and you were working on that. So you had probably like the idea that was gonna work.
Yeah.
But
Well, I like, you know, since I put so much time into music as a kid, I developed my talent pretty quickly. So I grew up in a smaller area, and people just felt like, anyone with talent, like they're gonna make it. Like it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen fast. And so like I had that said to me since I was a little kid, like you're gonna make it, you're gonna make it, you're gonna make it, like you're gonna blow up, you're gonna blow up. And so even though I didn't have like an inflated ego, but I did have inflated expectations. And so
mm-hmm.
I get picked up by this producer. My dad actually met him in Costco. It was like an interesting story, but I get picked up by this producer, and I'd written a ton of music, but I had whittled it down to about like 8 songs that I felt like were really, really good. And so I showed him, and he was like, this is amazing. Like, it's very unique. Let's get you out to Nashville and go get all of this recorded. And so over the next couple of months, we get all of the musicians in line, because we were using studio musicians, and
Mm-hmm.
get all of the songs prepared. We did a little bit of like reworking on the music, and then we go out there. And I mean, it was an amazing experience, but um, I met with a lot of executives, like the president of ASCAP, Songwriting Association, and
Hmm.
like the Nashville Songwriting Association and, all these different artists and like the head of the RCA Studios. And I very soon got the understanding that I was to be used to like mold into like a money making machine. It was like, oh,
Oh, they wanted to turn you into the next like Shania Twain or turn you into like a pop star.
well, yeah, more like into a country star. And for me, it's like I don't have any problem with country music, but that's not where my like heart lies
Oh,
as a
so
musician.
they wanted to kind of transform you into like the Dolly Parton part two or something.
Yeah, well, namely Taylor Swift, really. That was like the word that kept
Oh,
coming.
that was their target to make you like a
Yeah,
clone.
make me a clone of Taylor Swift because I was young. Like I was 17 at the time, I was really young.
Yeah,
And they wanted to target like young girls and all of this stuff, and my music was pretty dark. Like I was singing about, like, I had a song called I Sold My Soul to the Reaper. I had another one called Too Much Love for the Wicked, and that's how I've always been. I just write pretty dark music. And so I was meeting with like the head of ASCAP, and he was saying my music doesn't speak to teenage girls, and I felt like that was so funny because I was a teenage girl. Um,
well, it's a different type of teenage girl. They might listen to like Nirvana or Pearl Jam, or they might listen to like Judas Priest or
yeah,
you know Iron Maiden. It doesn't mean there aren't girls that listen to that. Um,
exactly.
but they have a demographic they want to hit,
hmm
and I guess that Taylor Swift demographic's not listening to Iron Maiden.
No, they're not listening to Iron Maiden. And so, like, even though I found like such an appreciation from these people, like they appreciated what I'd done and like my talent, there wasn't like support for what I was doing at that time. And so I was in like a very combative atmosphere the whole time I was there. And like the recording process itself was like absolutely transcendent with the musicians I was working with. I'd never experienced anything quite
Yeah,
like
it's like
that.
going to so it's going to school. It's like you're going to college.
Yeah.
You learn. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah,
No, it was beautiful. But then like I get out of that and there was a lot of turbulence and like the direction that I should go like with marketing, and people were constantly telling me to change my image and change my image. And um my parents were kind of the same way because like I adore them and they've been a huge support for me, but they felt like, oh, these people have so much experience, and so like no one was in my corner. It was really hard.
yeah. Everybody wanted you to. Yeah, well, it's hard because like when you want to do the darker stuff,
Part
like if you want to go the Kurt Cobain direction, people are like, well, look what happens when you go that way. Or like Evanescence, you could be like Evanescence or something. But they have a big, you could argue like that was a big band.
yeah.
A lot of people like that. So you can go darker and it
No, it
works.
can.
But yeah, but there's always these people that want to change and mold an artist. They always want to take somebody and turn them into the next Beyonce or the next Taylor Swift or the next Van Halen. Or, it is always clones of every band that hits it. The famous one like Monkeys and the
Yeah.
Beatles. The Monkeys are like a clone of the Beatles.
Yeah. You find something that works.
But
Yeah.
they end, yeah, yeah, you just run it to death, and then like ends up being like disco. It dies because like you run that genre too much, and I think like EDM is kind of running into
Yeah.
that where the structure was so tight
hmm
and it had to have the drop and it had to be that way. So we get how many songs that sound the same, and then it ends up dying like
Yep.
disco and getting put into the retro bin. Because if you get too much of the same thing, they eventually burn it out.
Yeah, and people like they know what they're going to hear when they listen to it, like in a way where they're not getting surprised. Like when I listen to a song and it surprises me, that song goes on my playlist. And I'm not saying like everything I listen to is super unpredictable, because I like some mainstream pop and whatnot, just like everybody else. Like it's fun. But I
Yeah,
always love to get surprised by music. And I felt like anything unique about me when I was in Nashville, it was like everyone was telling me how unique I was and how awesome my music was, and then wanting to change everything that they supposedly found so unique and awesome. So when I, yeah. And so when I finally was able to separate myself from that situation, it was like a 4-year long ordeal. Because I was like contractually obligated and all of this fun stuff.
yeah,
When I was able to separate myself from that, my parents, it was like not only did I realize that direction wasn't fruitful, because like one, I was like, my music after it was recorded and with all of the opposition, it had turned into kind of like a mutation of like my music plus like some like weird country remix kind of thing. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
what I had hoped it would be, and it wasn't, I don't think, it became even less marketable in this weird compromise that we came to. So I decided to separate myself from that, and I was like, I will always be a blues and rock and roll girl for sure, but how can I like incorporate that in a way where it's like I'm able to separate myself from this crappy past experience I've had, and also play into the more modern influences that seem to be working a little bit better, and that audiences seem to be relating to a bit more in this day and age.
Yeah, because I mean, when I'm looking at Crushed Velvet and I was listening to it, it kind of like Evanescence, and Evanescence comes to mind, and a lot of the kind of dark wave kind of sound I've heard, and not exactly what some of the synthwave bands are doing, but it has like I can hear the Stevie Nicks influence, I can hear Cohen, I can hear you actually breaking out of what you had described what your first album was. You're actually truer to what you want to do.
Yeah.
Like the darker is coming through. Like the metal influence is being kind of morphed into this new kind of synth kind of dark wave.
Yeah,
Maybe.
like I like to take so like Metallica for me is a huge inspiration. I like to take those structures, like the structures of those songs and the chord progressions and the keys that they're played in, and I
Mm-hmm.
like to interpret that into like electronic music. So for me it's like I can listen to metal and I could listen to that back to back and hear like where they overlap, but then they're still like distinctly different from each other. So it's been
Do you find when you're but do you find when you run with a lower BPM that you can kind of get more expansive or more ambient?
pardon?
Like if you do like the beats per minute, when you slow it down,
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you actually make things, then you kind of can stretch things out and it becomes more ambient, more psychedelic, more you know, uh, like atmospheric kind of sound to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. People always get after me with the low BPM because I mean, I'm in the pop genre, so people want to hear something that like slumps and it hits, and you have like this breakdown in the chorus and everything. But I really like the lower BPM because like you said, I'm able to create like a landscape instrumentally. There's so much more room for that, and there's more room to like put in little tidbits and hear them and appreciate them. Because when I write music and I arrange songs, I want to like see a landscape in my mind. Like I want it to take me somewhere visually in my mind.
Like a sound painting. Like Hendrix described Electric Lady as a sound painting when somebody asked him what it
Yes.
was.
It,
He said, "This is a sound painting," and I always that stuck in my head because that's what a lot of progressive and experimental musicians they create sound paintings.
exactly.
You know, and it's when you go slower that you like a Pink Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
You start to hear everything. You can hear the strings. You can hear all the layering. Because if it goes so fast, you have to put your headphones on to hear what's going on. And then you might miss it because it's going so quick. But when it's slower, then everything kind of comes out, and you can kind of hear all the different levels of percussion and things that you do as a musician. You can really build like a painting.
It's
A
true.
painter layers, and an artist that's really thinking about how they want to present. You tend to have a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm. No, it's really, really true. And like the interesting thing about it is I feel like when it's slower and you're able to have a little bit more of a concept of like a landscape and um feel I feel like you're not filling in as much space. Like you allow a little bit more room. And so it's nice for me to listen to my music and hear like all of what I've put into it, but there's also like this nice space. Like um my marketing manager said that he listens to my music and there's like a type of space in it that's almost eerie, like it leaves you alone with your thoughts. And I was like, that's cool. I like
Well,
that.
that's what you
Yeah.
want.
It leaves you alone.
That's how you want people to take
Yeah.
it.
It's cool because like lots of pop
Oh
music
yeah,
distracts you from your thoughts. And so the fact that he said that it leaves you alone with them, I was like, I didn't even mean to do that. So that's really cool.
yeah. well, there's so many people who want to run, 160 beats per minute, 180. They want to, even get really faster, but just because they want to do like a club banger, they want to get they want to get people like aerobics,
Yeah.
it's like Jane Fonda workout. Like I'm like, what's going on? It's like, okay, like, do you want somebody to actually feel what's going on? Is it all just about the beat?
Mm-hmm.
And some music, it's like, do you even know what the artist is saying, or is it just the
Yeah.
beat? And it seems there's certain producers are into this, like just creating these beats, and everybody's like, yeah, that's a jamming beat. But it's like, okay, but what does it
Mm-hmm.
say? And it's almost like in like 50s bubblegum music doesn't really say
Mm-hmm.
anything, but it's
Mm-hmm.
popular, and there's a danger in that. That we go, okay, yeah, but what does it really mean?
Yeah,
If you're a songwriter, you want to paint a picture, you want to tell a
it's
story.
true.
And if you're just doing this kind of bangers, like type of thing, it's like, how is that telling a story?
Yeah. And
You
I
know?
mean, I've heard bangers that definitely tell like a story, and I feel like there's a place for them. Like when I listen to a record and it's like it has kind of an ebb and flow, and like it goes up tempo and then lower and it slows down. It's like I think a lot of modern pop albums are super front loaded, so like you get all of like the hit singles and the bangers in the front, and then as it goes through, you get the more contemplative songs. So like they're still there, but I think in the industry there's also that recognition that like people do just also want those songs that they can turn their brain off to, or like run to at the gym, or scream at the top of their lungs while they're
Yeah.
drunk. I think there is a place for that type of music as well.
Yeah. I think what happens is like there are people that are into music that don't actually really like
Mm-hmm.
music. And in order to make money, you sell to
Yeah.
them. But if you want to go back and be like a James Taylor, or be like Carly Simon, or be like Neil Diamond, or the Beatles, or the Stones, and you want to do an EXO on Main Street, there's a different type of audience that's
It's
into
true.
that. That's gonna listen to The Wall, or gonna listen to the Beach Boys' Pet
Mm-hmm.
Sounds, and actually listen to the whole thing. And it's a different type of audience, and so and sometimes that audience becomes massive, and sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. Um, but an artist, if my heroes are like
Yeah.
Keith Emerson. There's only a certain type of person today is gonna like
Yeah.
Keith Emerson. You so or Tony Banks, or any of those guys that used to really get into synthesizer playing, like the big names in synthesis aren't what people listen to now. Electronic music, they assume all electronic musicians are not Keith Emerson or Tony Banks. They're like
Yeah.
DJs, and that's not exactly an electronic musician from the purest standpoint of what the musicians that created like switched on
Mm-hmm.
Bach. You know that's a different type of
It is.
musician. Um, so that's there's a market for everything, but I think some people have forgotten about that level.
Yeah, I think like I just have a feeling that it's coming back around, because just like the music that's becoming popular is really just antithetical to what was popular 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago,
Yeah,
we were still coming out of that like boy band Britney Spears thing where everything was hyper manufactured. You find someone that is a good dancer, good singer, they're really attractive, and then you create like this whole image around them. You pair all of these attractive men together and you create in sync whatever. And so we were just barely like starting to roll off of that, and then we're getting more like pop punk um type of music. Like Plain White Tees was there for a millisecond, but like that kind of music started to happen, and now I think everyone's sick of that. It's like we've seen that, we've heard that, we know that's not real. And so even though the music that's coming out is like, you have the mumble rap kind of thing going on,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's just like the anti-music. It's like people are sick of hearing what they've heard for the last 20 years, and so it's like, let's put out something that like doesn't necessarily appeal to the people that are over the age of 25, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is for us. Like we're taking that back. We're saying, hey, studios, like you don't have the power
Yeah,
over us anymore as consumers. So it's interesting to me. So I think right now how everything's kind of ridiculous, like this song that broke the record for Thriller as like weeks in the number one slot was Old Town Road by Lil Nas X
yeah,
or whatever. And that was just a silly song
yeah.
inspired by a video game.
Yeah, it's kind of like a 50. It's kind of like a 1950s
Yeah,
tempo.
exactly. But it was just it's silly.
Oh, yeah, silly kind of nonsense thing. I like them, like how much is that doggy in a window? Everybody likes that.
Yeah.
It doesn't really mean anything, but it's catchy. Um, so you're like catchy stuff. So you make kind of catchy songs. It's not bad. I mean, people like those. I mean, I really like these little 2 minute, 3 minute songs. Were like that. But yeah, what's interesting is like the
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit.
Prophet, they all came back to life, and now there are people all over the world using like modern versions of the modes
Hmm.
in the Prophet 5, and they're like,
You're breaking up pretty bad.
yeah, like an 80s band, like a New Human League. And
Hmm.
there's that kind of thing going on. You got bands like Sleater Kinney, which is like
Yeah.
the Riot Girl band, and then they're outperforming a lot of male rock bands.
Yeah, right, girl.
Yeah, the Riot Girl kind of like their newest album is a mixture.
Oh no, I can't hear you anymore. I can't hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, you're breaking up pretty bad for
Okay.
a second.
Okay, yeah, but I'm saying it seems like there is a kind of resurgence of this kind of Riot Girl, new wave intersection, where some of that stuff is coming back, where people actually are playing, and creating like statements with their
Hmm.
music that are like album oriented statements.
Yeah, I love that.
You know,
Well, I love the whole concept album thing, and I think that's starting to happen again, finally, and more of like a mainstream way too. And I think that's good because it's encouraging people to listen to the whole body of work instead of just a single. And the business has been so single focused for a hot minute now. I mean, that's what I was always told when I was younger. It's like you just need the single, and it's like, well, I mean, sure, for sure, like you do need a single, but I love listening to albums front to back and like getting a whole story out of
yeah,
it.
yeah, like Born to Run.
Yeah.
Born to Run is just like when you listen to a full, or like you listen to Tapestry. I mean, that's where I go back and I listen to these classic albums, and I'm like,
Hmm.
that is where I'm headed. Like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway from
Yeah.
Genesis. I mean, it's a concept album. Tommy, Quadrophenia, Styx, all these bands that you had to sit down in the vinyl, you'd go into a room and you'd listen to the whole Yes album. That's what
Yeah.
you would do. You'd listen to, like Fragile. You listen to the whole
Hmm.
thing. You wouldn't go pick and choose, which I understand because, the medium changed where people have, their iPhones and their iPods and they can create playlists. Once they created these playlists, people can kind of just pick whatever they want. And then that kind of drove the industry to say albums are dead. You don't need to do albums. But bands are hip hop actually kind of started changing
Hmm.
that. When you have Kendrick Lamar's like Butterfly,
Yeah.
that you had to listen to the whole thing. Like even a guy like Tyler the Creator or Igor. I mean, you have to listen. It's a
Yeah, you
concept.
have to listen to the whole
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. Hip hop, I think, kind of drove it back. Where in hip hop, a lot of albums are designed to be listened to all the way through as a concept.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's like that's starting to happen again. And like a lot of these hip hop artists are making their own beats, and especially the smaller ones that are coming up now. And so it's like you're getting a resurgence of like the artist instead of the company that has created this like whole blend of everything. Like if you look at the writers on Britney Spears's albums, there's like 15 per song. And then if you go on
Yeah,
Igor with Tyler the Creator, it's just like him and one other person.
yeah. Because that's kind of like the singer songwriter to me is like I go back and listen to like Blood on the
Hmm.
Tracks. Dylan. I mean, Dylan's like the ultimate like singer songwriter poet, and he would come up with these, just the idea that you don't have to have the perfect in pitch voice, but if you say something vital, if you have a band like Robbie Robertson in the band
Yeah.
behind you, you're gonna create like this Americana awesome stuff that just people have to deal with.
Hmm.
And that's kind of Dylan kind of went out there and said, I don't have to have perfect pitch. I don't have to be Sinatra, but I can say something.
Yeah.
And then I can have really good musicians behind me, and we can actually put something together like Blonde on Blonde, and we create this music. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. And people end up coming to him even after he got booed in Newport Jazz, and he got booed in London. And then suddenly everybody realized like Dylan was saying
Yeah.
something. That to me, it's like it seems to be happening again, that people are realizing the singer-songwriters are
They
important.
are. Well, it's because they're like, you need that really personal touch to music sometimes, you know? Like, it's fun to hear songs about turning up in the club or whatever. But sometimes when you sit down and you listen to a song, like there's this song called National Anthem by Gaslight Anthem. It's not the actual national anthem. But it is by far one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. And it was just written by the lead singer. And, it is so different than every other song on their album. It's just guitar, like you have a little bit of percussion, that type of thing, but it tugs at you because the words are what is meant to be listened to in that song. It doesn't have this huge accompaniment that's supposed to get you up and moving. You're meant to contemplate it. And goodness, like I've listened to that song probably like 300 times and it still moves me. Like there's certain songs that will do that to you, and I feel like it's always the songs that come from such a deeply personal place, like with the fewer people involved, you know.
Yeah, if you have a mix, like this is the problem I think sometimes with like the DAWs, is DAWs will tell you like if you have key changes they're like are weird, they'll tell you get rid of them, and the thing is like if you go back in the history of rock, in our history of a lot of music, there's a lot of bands that did a lot of interesting key changes that if they ran through a DAW they would get rid of
Yeah.
it. And so that kind of tells you like the authenticity and originality of letting people, actually musicians, play something and not let the computer take over. There's something about that. There's something about not having it super layered, and being honest. I think it's the honesty of like doing maybe the second or third take and not doing it 10, 15
Mm-hmm.
times to try to make it perfect. Sometimes the imperfections in music actually make it
Oh,
beautiful.
you're right. And I mean, I'm a massive perfectionist, so it's like it's been very difficult for me to like be accepting of that. Like when I go in and I do vocal takes, I I could go in and do 400 vocal takes if I really wanted to, but I've really like this is what I do is I will be like, okay, you get 6. That's all you get. And if there's a little mistake that's like glaring that really bothers me, I can go in and fix that little spot. But that's what I do for myself so that I don't just like make it too perfect. Like something that was very eye-opening to me is one of my followers saw me live and was like, I love your voice so much live. And they were like almost better than like your studio voice because there's like more like to it live. And I was like, oh man, that's really eye-opening, you know, because it's like live I'm not thinking so much about like, oh, I need to sing this part perfectly or in this type of in
Yeah,
this type of way. It's like I'm just singing it the way that it comes out live, and it has more emotion, it has more energy. And that made me
yeah. I
realize that
think
just like the pure voice is so powerful, you know.
yeah, it's the honesty. Like what I used to. I read the story about Hendrix, and Hendrix was like a total perfectionist, and like he had like 20, 30 takes on Voodoo Child of all these
Mm-hmm.
solos, and the engineers are like, I can't tell which one's better
Yeah.
than the next because it's all Hendrix.
Yeah.
And it's like, but the thing is, it seemed like the earlier takes had like an authenticity and a power that were more impressive.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would tend to go with the earlier tapes, and that's what I've noticed with a lot of bands. Is like if when I talk to them, they'll say like the early, like the third or the second or third take usually is better than the 10th or 15th.
Oh, always. That's why I only give myself
They,
6, because it's like usually the
yeah,
second one's going to be the one I go with. But it's like I just have a
yeah,
couple for leeway, you know?
yeah. It just seems like what happens is like sometimes you start like not being as honest.
Yes.
Further down the line, you get away from the authenticity and honesty of the original recording, and you might have realized that, oh, I said too much, or I did this, and and it's actually more honest and more real in the early. It actually tends to be like what your member said, like it feels like a live performance.
Yeah, no, for real. And It's crazy because there was this one song I was super hung up on. It was Ride, and we had recorded, me and my engineer, we recorded the vocals on like an older microphone as like a scratch vocal. And so we got a nice like Neumann U87 and we were re-recording all the vocals, but for some reason that song I could not get to sound like anywhere close to that first recording. And it's not like it was like it sounded bad. It was something about the emotion and like the delivery of it, because that was the first take. It was a one take, that vocal. And I was getting so frustrated and I was like, I don't get what the problem is. And my engineer was like, when I hear you sing this song for like the 9,000th time, you know, we've been trying at it for days. He's like, I don't believe what you're saying the same way that I did the first time you sang it. And so I was like, you know what, maybe it was recorded on an older microphone, it's not as high of quality, but he was right. Like, I believe that take more. Like, I listened to it and I'm like, that is the take. Like, that's
Yeah.
the take. And so when you listen to the songs back to back, like if you're really into audio, like I am, you know, you can hear the
Yeah.
difference in microphone, but that microphone will never make up for what that first performance had, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like if you listen to the basement tapes from Dylan,
Mm-hmm.
like the original version, they just put them out, and they were just done in a basement on a reel-to-reel. But the original basement tapes that they put out, like with the band, they sound so impressive, and they're not recorded with very high fidelity
Mm-mm.
equipment. But the honesty of those recordings is like pure Americana. Dylan and the band, you know, this Canadian band playing Americana music in this strange kind of
Yeah.
mix. But it sounds so real. It sounds like even better than the studio version of the basement
Yeah.
tapes. And they finally put it out, and a lot of people had bootlegs for, you know, not supposed to have bootlegs, but a lot of people had them, and they always like mentioned that those original tapes were so much better than what the finalized version was.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. One of my favorite albums, this was a very transformative album for me. It's Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace by the Foo Fighters. Um, that was recorded in a garage. And holy
Yeah,
cow, it's just so lovely. Like, it doesn't have that corporate touch to it, you know. um you can just tell they sat down and they wrote it and there was no one over their shoulder telling them to change specific things. And man, I literally I went to the library, and I just saw it, and I had listened to the Foo Fighters a little bit on the radio or whatever, because I'm pretty young. I'm 24, so like the Foo
mm-hmm.
Fighters were like a little bit out of my age range, I guess. And so
Mm-hmm.
I go to the library and I just see the cover and I was like, why the hell not? Because it had a missile on it. And so I thought that was cool.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I pick it up and I take it home and I put it in my CD player. And it was like immediately, like I listened to the whole album twice in a row. And I was just sitting on the ground and I was like drawing. And nothing that I had listened to on the radio, just on the radio stations I was allowed to listen to, um,
Yeah.
it really like tugged at me the same way that this album did. And so I just got into the habit of like going to the library every week and getting albums that I had never listened to before, that I didn't recognize. And that's how I found such a massive love for like Metallica and Led Zeppelin and all the bands that just became like top
Yeah.
10, you know.
Well, it's interesting because like punk bands, like if you like that, what you're hearing in that kind of garage recording, like a band like the Ramones, and they have that kind of rawness because they kind of do lo-fi.
Yeah.
You know, bands like Husker Du or Replacements, you know, back in the early '80s, like early '90s, there was this whole movement of like pre-grunge with bands like Husker Du and, you know, Replacements, and they just had this like, you know, a lot of Camper Van Beethoven. They had this like sound. There was this indie college radio sound, like REM. All these bands were like living in this zone, and I'm in my 50s, so I grew up during that time. And there was a sound from the college radio where these bands were lo-fi, and they were on like record labels like SST, these very indie
Mm-hmm.
labels, and they purposely didn't record them. You know, they record like Sex Pistols or
Yeah.
Clash. You know, they're kind of lo-fi recording, but it gave a lot of authenticity to the sound. And it was weird when a lot of these bands got signed to Warner's.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Husker Du got signed to Warner's, and their Warner Brothers albums were good, but they didn't have the authenticity of their SST
Yeah.
recordings, because the SST recordings were done at this kind of lo-fi garage basement level. They had one album they did in a warehouse. They did it in 48
I
hours,
love
and they
that.
did first to second take. Everything was first, second take in a
Love
warehouse,
that.
and they just ran through it. And it's like a double record, but it has more authenticity than anything they did for Warner
Yeah.
Brothers. Just because it's a pure punk album recorded like in a punk aesthetic.
And well, exactly. It's sad that like in the pursuit of perfection, a lot of times labels they take out everything that like the audience actually loved about the music, you know? And you see that time and time again with like band after band after band, and people call it selling out. Um,
Yeah,
but it's hard because it's like once if you have a label, like there's something so amazing about a label where you have all this money, you have all these resources and people working, and it's like your ability to reach a larger audience is it's exponentially more, you know. But because you are signed and they're giving you this money and they're giving you these resources, you do have to like acquiesce to them to some extent. But in turn, you could lose the thing about you that your audience loves so much. So I've been so wary to sign to labels. I don't know, like so wary. I'm just like waiting to see if I can find the right arrangement with the right people that we're on like the
yeah,
exact same page, you know?
yeah. Well, sometimes you get bands that they work out like this, like a band like
Yes.
Wilco and like Radiohead have
Yeah.
gone indie, and they've maintained their sound because they basically just work out a distribution deal with the label to
Mm-hmm.
get into the stores, to get into the venues, to be able to get on big tours, but they control the production of their music themselves.
That's what I want to do for
And I
sure.
think that's like actually the deal I have with my label right now is I have a home studio and they let me put out everything. They engineer it, but they
Mm-hmm.
let me put out my music pretty much. Only thing they do is engineer it. They don't rearrange it. They
Yes.
just let me do what I want, and then they put it out. And you know, I'm on a low, like an indie label, but I'm able to maintain what my aesthetic is. I kind of have a punk aesthetic, even though I do electronic music.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's what I want to have, that sound. I want it to be kind of lo-fi electronic, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I like the label I'm on. Lets me do that without going and trying to turn it into something else. And that, you know, I only can reach so many people doing that, but it kind of keep it the way I want it to be, you know. But that's a choice. You know, if somebody ever comes to me with something better, maybe I'll look at it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like when Liz Phair went big, you know,
Yeah.
and girly sound that she created, and it was kind of like a Riot Girl, pre-Riot Girl.
Yeah.
And there's something about like, you know, Exile in Guyville. It has this sound that I don't know if you've ever heard Liz Phair, but she had this very unique sound, and it
Yeah,
was
I've heard
very
her.
indie. And then when she did her major label thing, they put the kind of the pop refocus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad, but it wasn't Exile in Guyville.
Yeah.
And so it got her the money she needed, and it got her the more fame than she had. But she actually kind of retreated and went back on her next release and actually put out like an indie record that was more like the old sound.
Yeah.
It was interesting because she kind of like, okay, there was a little backlash from her fans. They wanted her to go back. But it's interesting because, you know, her fan base was really indie college radio, and they didn't like her going that way. So it was interesting. She kind of went a step backward to like college radio level. But yeah, you never know. It's just kind of like what the world is today. You try to, you know, as an artist, you got to eat, you got to live.
Yeah.
You got to find a way to not have to have a day job.
For real. Music does not make money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an IT guy, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so I can fund all my modes, you know.
Yeah.
I can buy all my modes and I have all my cool gear, but you know, I don't have to try to starve. It's hard to starve when you have to buy a mode.
Yeah. The whole starving musician thing sounds really romantic, but it is difficult. So you got to
Yeah,
have a side hustle for sure.
yeah. So I mean, it's like everybody has to do what they need to do to get out there. But yeah, I like the idea. I don't give up. You know, either. I
Mm-hmm.
think like if you love music, you'll keep on creating music till you're like a jazz guy. You know, or old blues guy, they don't stop playing until they're done.
No.
You know, like the Stones are doing what the blues guys do. People's like, why are the Stones still playing? Well, you know, all the blues guys, they played until they were done.
Yeah.
And so if you're in that kind of that zone, that's the way you should look at it. But some pop people, they're like, oh, I have an expiration date, because you know the idea is it's all youth oriented. And so if once you get past a certain age, it's like, oh, you can't do it anymore. And it's like, but if you're in the blues, you can keep on doing it. If there's certain genres, like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But that's where you have to kind of push it and say, well, I'm cross genre. I do music. It's just music, you know.
Yeah, no, that's rough. That's a very good point. With pop music, there is an expiration date on your age, and also especially like with women. Like I feel like there's a sooner expiration date with women than there is with men, because it's like really the audience wants to see someone that's between the ages of like 17 and 27. Like you got like that 10 years.
Yeah.
And so that causes me a lot of stress, because like with how many times I've said no to people, and like dealing with all of the stuff where they were trying to turn me into a country musician and what have you, like it did set me back a little bit. And so sometimes I get like that little bit of like anxiety of like, oh no, like it's not like I'm getting close to 27, you know, but I've come to the realization as of late that it's like, it's music, you know, and some of my
Yeah.
favorite artists are in their 30s and 40s and 50s, you know, and I still listen to them, and I listen to every single album the second it comes out, you know. And so I think what's important is just like, as musicians, breaking that, like getting rid of the idea of an expiration date. And I think it's really like the corporations that have created that to begin with, because you didn't, I mean, back in the day, like even in like the 60s, 70s, it's like that wasn't so much a thing as it is now, you know?
Yeah, well, Aretha Franklin was able to keep on going. It wasn't like, she, until a health issue, she was going. And a lot of like, soul music, you can keep on
Mm-hmm.
going. Um, like soul, so there's a resurgence in the like neo soul, kind of retro soul, bringing back people back into the spotlight. And it doesn't matter what age they are,
No.
And there's a lot of older soul musicians that were in their late 50s, 60s, still kicking it.
Yeah.
You go to New Orleans, you see all these great blues people and soul guys, people still doing it because it's the music. Like you said, it's the music. If you play jazz or soul, you can kind of get away with it. Nobody
Yeah.
cares. It kind of gives the authenticity. It gives you the
Mm-hmm.
bones. Like the older you are, it's actually
Yeah.
better. Do people believe you more when you're saying like you got the hard life and you got the hard this, you're telling that kind of
Yeah, if
blues
you're
story.
21, they're like, yeah, right.
Like, how could you have such a hard life? Like Jack White would kind of carry that off. He's like a young guy and he's channeling the blues, but you're 22, Jack. Like, it's like when he was doing it, it's like, okay, you're not B.B. King, you're not kicking off like Curtis Mayfield. You're not, but it's interesting because like you said, female artists are kind of putting that, but it's cool to see a band like Sleater
Mm-hmm.
Kinney still kicking it, and they're not in the age category that a lot of record companies would say, well, you guys aren't
Yeah.
done. And they just put an album out that shows they're not done. I mean, a 4-star Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty impressive, and I think that should be kind of cool for a lot of women artists to see that they created that riot girl genre, and they're still kicking.
No, it's amazing. Like whenever I see female artists that are kicking it and they're like a little bit older or even like coming up in their 30s, I'm like, ooh, that's like a relief for me a little bit, because it's like there is that leeway in like blues and jazz and soul music and all of that, but like with pop, it's like super sexy, and
Yeah,
they want to
you got
see some.
a
Yeah,
diva.
you want to see like a diva. It's so funny. People are always telling me, they're like, you need to be like a queen and like this big diva, and I'm like, that is just so hilarious to me. Like knowing myself, it just like makes me laugh a little bit, but I do understand like why people want to see that. Like,
Well, they wanted to be like Lady Gaga and kind of carry that off.
yeah, and I love Lady Gaga. Don't get me wrong. Like she has such a powerful
No,
voice, but
yeah, she's cool. I mean, because she tried to do it straight like Bowie, and it didn't work. And then she created like a Bowie-like persona.
exactly.
you know.
It's funny how you have to do that. So the way I've kind of skirted around it is just it's like I become a bit of like a character of myself or like a caricature of what I'm singing about. And for me, that's I can separate myself from a little bit more. Because like the idea of being a character, man, for so long that really like bothered me, or the idea of my appearance being the reason why anyone would be interested in me and my music, like
Yeah,
all of these old guys telling me that I needed to like sex up my appearance and all of that. That was rough, but
yeah,
but it is true. So if I can be like, okay, well, this is a character that I'm using for this song, it's easier to do.
well, yeah. The cool thing about going in the dark wave, you could kind of go into this kind of gothic vampire, not the have to go that way, but if you're going dark wave, you can do things that kind of have a horror-esque, Alfred Hitchcock vibe, and it doesn't really matter if you use, all kinds of, visual cues or themes
Mm-hmm.
that would matter your age if you can carry off that kind of, an Elvira look or like an old school Alfred Hitchcock, Twilight Zone, Outer Limits kind of black and white look. There are things you can do that you could keep on presenting. If you're creative, you could present an image that doesn't necessarily have to focus on you.
Exactly. And that's what that's kind of like the goal that I'm setting at right now, like with the Blood Diamond music video. Super just like jarring and kind of creepy. um but I like that. I like that going like the more dark direction. I have a little bit more like liberty with like the visuals that I can use. And
Yeah, because if you go with horror, you could always come up with all kinds of different visual characterizations and directors that could take something and it's like you're playing the character. So if you're playing a character, it can be anything,
yeah,
and it doesn't have to be a 20-year-old or 17-year-old. You can present yourself in a different way, and
it brings like a fantasy element to it. Like if you can take it a little bit outside of reality, then all of those like confines of like age and whatnot, that they go along with it, you know.
yeah, you go into science fiction, you could go into like retro, you could do like a 20s flapper look, you could do all kinds of
You
crazy.
could.
You can go into any age and change the use all kinds of going back to original MTV. People directors would just go off and do something that has nothing to do with the
Yeah,
song.
just for fun.
You know, just for fun to do a video has nothing to do with the song. It's just totally artistic. Kind of like kind of like Velvet Underground, Andy Warhol.
Yeah.
Have a strange kind of vibe. Like Bowie. Bowie just created all these characters,
It's
and
great.
as he got older, he just didn't matter. He was still doing these characters, and he just kept on doing them, and it's different reinventions of himself. You
It
know,
made it made it fun and like really intriguing, because it just never got boring. You know, never got boring. It was never same old, same old. It's like instead of like changing who he was like as a person, like overall, it was like it was always morphing from project to project, from song to song. And so it's like you just it's like he was the frame for whatever piece of work he was showing the
yeah.
public.
And if you do it from a theatrical standpoint, I think you have a lot of life and a lot you can like argue to the marketing people. Is like if I do this kind of image and I can do that, and I get the right visual people to help me do the videos and do my stage show and actually present, you know. I think because like a lot of artists, like I think they asked Prince, is like, how come you just don't come out like in blue jeans or whatever? He's like, because I want to do a
Yeah.
show. I think that like what James Brown, Little Richard used to do, they would do shows. They would present themselves. Parliament Funkadelic, they used to come out in these space aliens.
Yeah.
Sun Ra did that too. Like a band, there was a jazz American band called Sun Ra that kind of predated Funkadelic. It was a jazz outfit that was playing jazz. That was like bebop, Miles Davis type jazz, but they wore space
It's so
outfits
wild.
with space capes, and I think George Clinton saw them and took that idea because it didn't really catch on when Sun Ra did it in the
Yeah.
50s. But by the time you get to the 70s, it worked
Yeah.
for Funkadelic. But it was interesting. Like they thought they should present a show, and a lot of acts. If you present yourself, and Prince had the kind of Bowie thing too. He was presenting himself in different like looks for every
Mm-hmm.
album. Would have a certain look. I mean, the whole Parade look where he wore the kind of bikini top was a different look than Purple Rain.
Yeah.
and the look for Sign of Times was a different look for Sign of Times. He was doing like the same thing. He was creating these like characters for every album. He had a different hairstyle, different look, different costumes. And I think when you do stuff like that, then you can kind of like extend your life or your show or
I
your
think
app.
so. I think you're totally right about that.
All right. So we would talk a while. That's cool. But yeah, we love to talk to artists about their albums, and you've got that new record out. And so have you been touring for this record?
I am getting a tour set up for the spring. Right now, I've been playing like a lot of shows locally, and I have had the wonderful opportunity to meet a local promoter that puts on like a lot of huge shows here. And so it's so funny, like I never would have expected, but I've been playing shows with a lot of drag queens, and they know how to put on a show, and it has inspired me to put on more shows, like, well, I guess like be more theatrical. And it has been absolutely amazing. Like I feel like every show I play just gets better and better, and i'm I'm just grateful because that's all thanks to people I've just come in contact with in the scene, you know. So I'm playing always. I have 2 shows coming up actually in Salt Lake this upcoming week, so should be good.
That's great. Well, I think we'll probably have to end it here,
Yeah.
but we're going to put this out on 11 different podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify.
Awesome.
Um, and I'll send you the links as they become available. It
Perfect.
is not live. What happens is that we record it, then we publish it, then it goes out to all of our 11 podcast platforms.
Mm-hmm.
And so then when we have that link, what's cool is there are hyperlinks that can be associated with the actual podcast that are clickable. So I can put your podcast link, and if you have any other links, you could send me links that you want to have appear on this episode if you have any particular link you want people to go to.
Oh, awesome. Well, I will send you some stuff, and it's been a treat to talk to you, and thanks for asking me.
Yeah, we've had 3-4 times. So if you have a brand new album in the next year or any other kind of project you want to talk about, we can always put you on again.
Super cool. Well, thank you. Yeah, let me know once you have it up, and I will share it on all my platforms as well.
Well, this was Cera Gibson, and we thank you for being on the Fan Electric Go Show. Have a great
Thank you
night.
so much.